She thought the Duke hired her to cook until his daughter whispered, "I picked you to be my mommy." The kitchen maid's knuckles were white against her traveling bag when the child's whisper stopped her heart. "I picked you to be my mommy." Clara Finch had come to Greymere Hall expecting flour and wages, nothing more. She had survived London's cruelest kitchens, dodged wandering hands, and learned that safety meant invisibility. But 7-year-old Poppy Weatherby had other plans, and her father, the grief-stricken Duke of Greymere, was about to learn that some storms arrive in aprons, carrying soup spoons instead of swords. Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this tale of unexpected families and second chances, I'd be grateful for a like or subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories of courage, healing, and love that defies expectations. Tell me in the comments, have you ever met someone who changed your life in a single moment? I read every note. 1. Clara's boots crunched on the gravel drive of Greymere Hall, and she forced her shoulders straight despite the weight of everything she carried. The house loomed ahead, all grey stone and shuttered windows, looking exactly like what it was, a place where joy had died and nobody had bothered to bury it properly. She was here for one reason. Work. Decent wages, a clean kitchen, and absolutely no drama. After 18 months of dodging entitled sons and cruel accusations in London's finest households, Clara wanted only to cook, earn her keep, and disappear into the routine of chopping vegetables and kneading bread. The staff entrance led to a stone corridor that smelled of lye soap and old wood. A stern-faced steward named Mr. Pembroke inspected her like she was livestock at market, his gaze lingering on her worn cloak and scuffed boots. "His Grace requires a cook who can manage the child," Pembroke said flatly. "The last 3 couldn't." "Can you?" Clara met his eyes. "I can cook food that people actually want to eat. Whether that manages anyone is their choice, not mine." Pembroke's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Almost. The kitchen was massive, equipped for grand dinners that clearly no longer happened. Copper pots hung like sleeping bells. The great hearth stood cold despite the autumn chill. Mrs. Daintree, the housekeeper, waited beside the work table, her face kind but tired in the way of women who'd watched too much sadness. Then he entered. Alaric Weatherby, Duke of Greymere. Clara had expected arrogance, the usual aristocratic distance. Instead, she saw exhaustion. He was perhaps 35, tall and well-formed, but he moved like a man carrying stones in his pockets. His dark hair needed cutting. His cravat was slightly crooked. His eyes held the particular emptiness of someone who'd stopped believing in tomorrow. "Miss Finch." His voice was quiet, controlled. "Mrs. Daintree speaks highly of your references. I have one question. Can you cook something my daughter will actually eat?" The rawness in that question caught Clara off guard. This wasn't about impressing guests or displaying culinary skill. This was about a father watching his child fade away, one refused meal at a time. "I can try, Your Grace," Clara said. "What does she like?" "I don't know anymore." The admission seemed to cost him. "Nothing elaborate. She pushes away anything fancy. My late wife used to." He stopped. Swallowed. Started again. "Simple foods. Comforting ones." Clara nodded, already moving toward the larder. She found chicken, lemons, fresh herbs, good butter. Within 20 minutes, she had a pot of lemon chicken broth simmering, filling the kitchen with the kind of warmth that couldn't be faked. She shaped small dumplings, light as clouds, and set them to poach. The Duke watched in silence, and Clara pretended not to notice the way his hands gripped the table edge. A sound at the doorway made them both turn. The child was tiny for 7, all dark curls and enormous grey eyes that seemed to see too much. She wore a simple dress, not the elaborate confections wealthy children usually suffered through. She moved cautiously, like someone who'd learned that good things vanished if you grabbed too quickly. "Poppy." The Duke's voice gentled completely. "Come meet Miss Finch. She's made you something." Clara ladled broth into a simple bowl, added 3 dumplings, and carried it to the small table by the hearth. She didn't crouch or speak in the sing-song voice adults used with children. She simply set it down and stepped back. "It's hot," Clara said. "Give it a moment." Poppy approached like a cat considering a new person. "She's Saturday." She lifted the spoon with surprising grace. She tasted one careful mouthful. Clara watched the child's face transform, surprise giving way to something like relief. Poppy took another spoonful, then another. Then she set down her spoon and looked directly at Clara with those two old eyes. "I picked you to be my mommy." The words landed like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. A ladle clattered against the stone floor. Mrs. Daintree gasped. The Duke's face went white, then red with mortification. "Poppy." His voice was strangled. "You cannot say such things." But the child's gaze never left Clara's face, and Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. This wasn't childish fancy. This was a 7-year-old who'd been planning something, waiting for the right person to walk through the door. Clara's first instinct was to run. She'd seen this trap before, different variations of the same danger. Staff who got too close to lonely children. Gossip that turned vicious. Women whose reputations were destroyed by whispers they couldn't control. "Your Grace, I should..." Clara started backing toward the door. "Please." The Duke's voice was quiet but desperate. "Don't go. She hasn't eaten properly in weeks. She hasn't." He stopped, looking at his daughter with such naked fear that Clara's professional distance wavered. "Stay for a trial week. For her sake." Clara should have refused. Should have gathered her bag and walked away from this beautiful disaster waiting to happen. But Poppy had moved from her chair and was now gripping Clara's apron with small, determined fists. "I'll stay," Clara heard herself say. "But we need to be clear, Your Grace. I'm here to cook. Nothing more. No games. No fantasies. And absolutely no talk of that word." She couldn't even say mommy. It felt too dangerous. The Duke nodded, relief flooding his face. "Of course. I'll make sure the staff understands." "Thank you, Miss Finch." Poppy looked up at Clara, and something shifted in those grey eyes. Calculation. Strategy. The child released Clara's apron and returned to her soup. Just before Clara escaped to unpack her things, Poppy's voice followed her, sweet as honey and twice as sticky. "Then I'll just call you mine." Mrs. Daintree showed Clara to a small room in the servants' quarters, clean and simple with a narrow bed and a window overlooking the kitchen garden. After the housekeeper left, Clara sat on the bed and pressed her hands to her face. What had she just agreed to? Through the floorboards, she could hear the Duke's low voice, patient and gentle, explaining something to Poppy. The child's laughter, rare enough to sound startling, drifted up like smoke. Clara unpacked her few belongings, her mind already calculating. 1 week. She would stay 1 week, make sure the child was eating properly, then find some graceful way to leave before the situation became complicated. But as she hung her spare dress on the peg and tucked her mother's small prayer book beneath her pillow, Clara couldn't shake the memory of Poppy's face. That ancient determination in such a young child. That whispered declaration that had sounded less like fantasy and more like a promise. "I picked you." Not "I wish" or "I want." Picked. Like Clara was an apple from a tree, carefully chosen for ripeness and sweetness. Like Poppy had been waiting, watching, evaluating every woman who passed through these doors until the right one appeared. Clara lay down fully clothed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the old house settle around her. Somewhere below, the Duke was probably sitting in his study, head in his hands, wondering how his life had become so thoroughly ambushed by a 7-year-old with a spoon. And Clara, despite every sensible instinct she possessed, wondered what it would be like to be picked. Chosen. Claimed by someone who looked at her and saw not a servant to be used or discarded, but a person worth keeping. She pushed the thought away firmly. That kind of wondering led nowhere good. But as sleep crept closer, her last conscious thought was of Poppy's small voice, certain as sunrise, "I picked you to be my mommy." And Clara, God help her, hadn't said no. 2. Clara learned quickly that Greymere Hall had been holding its breath for 2 years. The late Duchess Eleanor, they called her in whispers, had died of fever when Poppy was 5. Since then, the house had operated like a ship with no captain, all sails, and no direction. The Duke performed his duties mechanically. Poppy had stopped talking for 6 months. The servants moved through rooms like ghosts haunting their own lives. Clara's first week became 2, then 3. Nobody mentioned leaving anymore. The kitchen became her territory. She rose before dawn, when the world was still dark and quiet, and built the day around the simple magic of flour, butter, heat. She baked bread that made the footman linger near the kitchen door. She roasted chickens that actually tasted like chickens instead of expensive disappointment. She made vegetable soups so good that even Mr. Pembroke asked for seconds. But her real work, the work nobody had hired her for, happened in the margins. Poppy began appearing at odd hours, accidentally forgetting her favorite ribbon on the kitchen counter, requesting extra biscuits for her dolls, insisting that her father must personally taste everything for poison, which meant the Duke found himself in the kitchen far more often than dignity suggested. Clara refused to encourage it. She refused to dream. She was here to work, nothing more. But she couldn't ignore what she saw. The Duke ate like a man who'd forgotten that food was meant to nourish, not just sustain. He took meals standing up, reading correspondence, his attention anywhere but on the plate before him. He'd lost weight. His clothes hung slightly loose. And Poppy watched him with the terrible awareness of a child trying to keep a parent alive through sheer force of will. One morning, Clara was rolling out pastry dough when small hands appeared on the table edge. "Can I help?" Poppy asked. Clara considered refusing. Keeping distance was safer. But something in the child's face, that careful hope, made her nod. "Wash your hands first. Properly." Poppy scrubbed until her hands were pink, then returned to Clara's side. Clara handed her a small piece of dough and showed her how to knead, push and fold, working the butter in gently. They worked in comfortable silence until the Duke appeared in the doorway, drawn by the unusual sound of his daughter's laughter. Poppy had accidentally stuck dough to her nose. "Poppy." His voice held gentle reproof. "You're disturbing Miss Finch's work." "She's helping," Clara said. "Good help is always welcome." The Duke hesitated, and Clara recognized the expression. He wanted to join them but didn't know how. Didn't believe he was allowed to exist in spaces of simple joy. "Your Grace," Clara said, not looking up from her pastry, "this dough needs 2 people to turn it properly. Unless you'd prefer I burn breakfast trying to manage alone." It was a lie. She could manage fine. But it was also permission. The Duke moved to the table slowly, like a man approaching a wild animal. Clara positioned him opposite her, showed him how to press and fold. Within minutes, he was covered in flour. His expensive coat was dusted white. A smudge marked his jaw. He looked ridiculous. He looked human. He looked happy. Poppy giggled, actually giggled, at the sight of her formal father turned into a flower ghost. The Duke met Clara's eyes over his daughter's head, and something passed between them. Gratitude, maybe. Or recognition. 2 people who understood that healing happened in small moments, not grand gestures. "I'm terrible at this," the Duke admitted, examining his flour-covered hands. "Spectacularly terrible," Clara agreed. "Truly impressive in your incompetence, Your Grace." Poppy dissolved into giggles. The Duke's mouth twitched into an actual smile, the first Clara had seen. After that, the kitchen visits became routine. The Duke would appear at odd hours, offering to help, mostly making things worse in ways that were somehow endearing. He couldn't dice vegetables evenly. He burned toast. He once added salt instead of sugar to a cake batter and didn't realize until Poppy spat out her first bite. But he laughed. And his daughter, seeing him laugh, bloomed like a flower finally turned toward the sun. The staff noticed. Some approved. Others whispered concerns about propriety and forgetting one's place. Clara ignored them all and focused on her work. But late one afternoon, she overheard something that stopped her cold. She was in the still room, organizing herbs, when Poppy's voice drifted through the partially open door. The child was in the corridor, talking to her doll in that serious way children did when working through big feelings. "If he smiles again tomorrow, I'll keep her," Poppy whispered. "If he eats a whole meal. If he stops looking sad when he thinks I'm not watching. Then I'll know it's working, and I'll keep her forever." Clara's breath caught. This wasn't innocent fantasy. This was a 7-year-old running a careful campaign to heal her father by bringing joy back into the house. And Clara was the instrument of that campaign, whether she'd agreed to it or not. The realization terrified her, because it meant Poppy had been planning this from the moment Clara arrived. Watching, testing, measuring results. I picked you. Not randomly. Strategically. Clara leaned against the still-room wall, suddenly exhausted. She'd been so careful to protect herself, to maintain distance, to avoid becoming the story that servants whispered about. But Poppy had outmaneuvered her with nothing but soup, flour, and a child's ruthless clarity about what her family needed. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She rose after midnight and went down to the kitchen, seeking the comfort of familiar space. She found the Duke there, standing at the counter in his shirt sleeves, eating cold pie directly from the dish with a fork. He froze when he saw her, guilty as a child caught stealing sweets. Miss Finch. I didn't mean to, I was just, he set down the fork. I'll go. Your Grace. Clara's voice was quiet. You don't need to eat standing over a sink like you don't deserve a plate. Something in his face crumpled slightly, then carefully rebuilt itself. My daughter likes you. Clara moved to the hearth, stirring the banked coals back to life. Your daughter likes anyone who doesn't vanish. The words hung between them, honest and sharp. The Duke stood very still. Is that what I've done? His voice was rough. Vanished? You're here, Clara said. But you're not present. There's a difference. She shouldn't speak this way to a duke. Should remember her place, her position, her complete lack of right to opinions about his life. But exhaustion and truth had their own authority. She died in the spring, the Duke said suddenly. Eleanor. 2 years and 4 months ago. I keep thinking I should feel better by now. Less, absent. But every time I start to feel something that isn't grief, I feel like I'm betraying her memory. Clara turned to face him. Your daughter needs a father who can eat a meal at a table. Who can smile without guilt. Who can exist in the present instead of living in a grave. The Duke flinched, but he didn't deny it. I don't know how, he said simply. I know. Clara's voice gentled. But you're trying. The flour. The burned toast. The terrible vegetable chopping. You're trying. That's what she sees. They stood in the warm kitchen, the fire crackling softly, two people who'd both learned that survival sometimes meant forgetting how to live. Thank you, Miss Finch, the Duke said finally. For the soup. For the patience. For not vanishing. He left before Clara could respond. She returned to her small room as dawn lightened the sky, and lay down knowing that everything had changed. She wasn't just the cook anymore. She was part of Poppy's plan, part of this family's slow climb back toward daylight. And Clara, despite every self-protective instinct, found she didn't want to leave. If you're enjoying this story, I'd be so grateful for a like and subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories you'd love. 3. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by a London courier and delivered directly to Mr. Pembroke's office. Clara was in the kitchen, teaching Poppy how to separate eggs, when Mrs. Daintree appeared in the doorway with a face like a funeral. Miss Finch. A word. Now. The housekeeper's tone made Clara's stomach drop. She wiped her hands on her apron and followed Mrs. Daintree to the still room, leaving Poppy with instructions to practice on her own. Mr. Pembroke stood waiting, his expression carved from ice. In his hands was a single sheet of expensive paper. This, he said without preamble, is from Lord Ashton's London household. Your previous employment. Clara's blood turned cold. She knew, before he spoke another word, exactly what that letter contained. They report missing silver, Pembroke continued, his voice flat with judgment. Specifically, a Georgian tea service. They also include a warning about your character, stating you are not respectable and suggesting you left under questionable circumstances. The words were careful, but their meaning was poison. Missing silver plus questionable circumstances meant only one thing in the careful language of aristocratic households: theft and sexual impropriety. Clara forced herself to breathe. May I see it? Pembroke handed her the letter. She read it twice, her hands remarkably steady considering her entire life was disintegrating. Lord Ashton's steward had written with vicious precision. The missing silver. Clara's sudden departure. A delicate suggestion that she'd been overly familiar with male staff members. A warning to all future employers to verify character thoroughly. Every word was a lie. But every word would also be believed, because this was how power worked. Men accused, women suffered, and reputation was a weapon that never required proof. "I want her gone," Pembroke said to Mrs. Daintree. "Today. We cannot risk scandal touching His Grace's household." "Thomas," Mrs. Daintree's voice held warning. "Let's not be hasty." "Hasty?" Pembroke's face reddened. "She's been here 3 months, making herself essential to the child, working her way into the Duke's good graces. This is exactly how these situations develop. I won't have His Grace made a fool." Clara felt the familiar sick weight of helplessness. This was London again. This was every kitchen where powerful men decided truth didn't matter if lies served them better. "I'll pack my things," she said quietly. Dignity was all she had left. "Clara, wait." Mrs. Daintree gripped her arm. "Tell us what really happened." "It doesn't matter what really happened." Clara's voice was flat. "Nobody believes the cook over the Lord's son." "Try us," a new voice said from the doorway. The Duke stood in the still room entrance, his face unreadable. How long had he been there? How much had he heard? "Your Grace." Pembroke straightened. "This is a household matter. I'm handling. You're dismissing my daughter's cook based on accusations from a London household." The Duke's voice was quiet, but something in it made Pembroke step back. "I'd like to hear Miss Finch's account before decisions are made." "Alone." Pembroke looked like he'd swallowed glass. "Your Grace, that's hardly proper." "Mrs. Daintree will remain," the Duke said. "But you're dismissed, Pembroke. Close the door on your way out." The steward left, and his fury was a living thing. The Duke moved to the table and sat, gesturing for Clara to do the same. Mrs. Daintree stationed herself by the door, a silent witness. "Tell me," the Duke said simply. Clara's throat felt tight. She'd never told anyone the full story. What was the point? Working women had no credibility against aristocratic sons. But something in the Duke's face, that careful attention, made her try. "Lord Ashton's son came home from Oxford for the summer," she began. "Arthur. He was 19. He decided he liked watching me work in the kitchen." The Duke's expression didn't change, but his hands curled into fists on the table. "At first, it was just looking. Then comments. Then he started finding excuses to be alone with me. One afternoon, he cornered me in the larder." Clara kept her voice steady. "Professional. Like she was describing weather. He said I should be grateful for the attention. Said nobody would believe me if I complained. He was right about that part." "Did he touch you?" The Duke's voice was very quiet. "He tried. I hit him with a copper pot. Split his lip. He bled all over his expensive shirt." Clara met the Duke's eyes. 2 days later, silver went missing. Suddenly I was a thief. Suddenly I was not respectable. The steward gave me an hour to leave and said if I ever tried to use them as reference, they'd make sure I never worked again. Silence fell like snow. "The silver?" the Duke asked. "I assume Arthur took it himself. Sold it. Used the money for whatever 19-year-old aristocrats waste money on. I never touched it." Mrs. Daintree made a small, furious sound. The Duke stood and moved to the window, his back to them both. Clara waited for the dismissal. The polite regret. The carefully worded explanation that scandal was scandal, regardless of truth, and he couldn't risk his daughter's reputation. Instead, the Duke turned around and his face was carved from stone and fury. "You're staying," he said. "Your Grace," Clara started. "You're staying," he repeated. "Anyone who cannot accept that may seek employment elsewhere. That includes Pembroke. The gossip," Mrs. Daintree began, "will be managed." The Duke's voice was final. "I will not allow this household to punish a woman for having the courage to defend herself. That's not the example I want my daughter to see." Clara felt something crack open in her chest. Not love, she wasn't fool enough for that. But something. Recognition, maybe. Or hope that she'd tried very hard to stop feeling. "Thank you, Your Grace," she whispered. "Don't thank me. His voice softened. I'm simply refusing to be the kind of man who lets injustice happen because it's convenient. He left, presumably to inform Pembroke that his moral outrage was no longer required. Mrs. Daintree moved to Clara's side and gripped her hand. He's a good man. Better than most. But Clara, this will cause talk. I know. And that child adores you. If you leave now. I'm not leaving, Clara said. The decision surprised her even as she spoke it. Not because the Duke ordered me to stay. Because I don't want to run anymore. That night, Clara was in her room, trying to calm her racing heart, when she heard soft footsteps in the corridor. Her door opened without knocking, something only one person in this house would dare. Poppy stood in the doorway in her nightgown, bare feet on the cold floor. I heard, the child said. I was listening at the door. They want to send you away. Clara patted the narrow bed. Poppy climbed up and curled against her side, small and warm and trembling slightly. I'm not going anywhere, Clara said. Promise. Poppy's voice was so small. People always promise and then they leave anyway. Clara thought about lying. About making easy promises that might not hold. But this child had already survived too many broken promises. I can't promise forever, Clara said honestly. Nobody can. But I promise I won't leave without telling you why. I promise I'll fight to stay. Is that enough? Poppy considered this with her usual unsettling seriousness. Then she whispered, so quietly Clara almost missed it. Don't let them send you away like Mama. Clara went very still. The word Mama had been a locked room in this house. Nobody spoke about the late Duchess. Nobody mentioned her name. The grief was too raw, too present. Your Mama didn't choose to leave, Clara said carefully. She got sick. That's different from people choosing to go away. But she left. Poppy's voice cracked. She left and Papa stopped laughing and everything got cold and quiet and nobody talks about her because it makes Papa sad. So I don't talk about her either. But I remember. Clara held the child closer, this small girl who'd been carrying adult grief for 2 years. You can talk about her, Clara whispered. Remembering people we love isn't sad. It's how we keep them real. Poppy cried then, finally, great shuddering sobs that seemed too big for her small body. Clara held her through it, rocking slightly, the way her own mother had once held her when the world felt too sharp. Eventually, Poppy's tears slowed. She didn't pull away. I picked you, she whispered against Clara's shoulder, because you smiled at me like I wasn't broken. And because when I said that thing about being my mommy, you didn't lie and say you would be. You told the truth. People who tell the truth stay longer. Clara's heart broke and mended in the same moment. I'm here, she said. For as long as they'll let me be. Poppy fell asleep against her shoulder. Clara carried her back to the nursery, tucked her into bed, and stood watching the child's peaceful face in the moonlight. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. Pembroke would gossip. Lady Augusta, the Duke's mother, would eventually hear about the unsuitable cook. Society would sharpen its knives. But tonight, a child slept soundly. And a man who'd forgotten how to live had defended a woman with nothing to recommend her except truth. Clara returned to her own room and lay in the darkness, counting heartbeats, preparing for war. 4. Lady Augusta Weatherby arrived at Greymere Hall like winter arriving early, beautiful, cold, and utterly convinced of her own necessity. The Duke's mother was 60, elegant as a blade, with silver hair dressed in the latest London fashion and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She swept into the entrance hall trailing maids and trunks and the unmistakable scent of expensive perfume. Clara, observing from the kitchen doorway as servants rushed to accommodate the sudden arrival, felt her stomach sink. The Dowager Duchess, Mrs. Daintree murmured beside her, has excellent timing and terrible intentions. She's here about you. How do you know? Because she wasn't expected until Christmas. When Lady Augusta travels 3 months early, someone is being managed. The household transformed overnight. Lady Augusta had come for a small house party, 12 guests, nothing elaborate, just a quiet gathering to restore normalcy to Greymere Hall. Which meant, Clara learned from kitchen gossip, pushing a suitable widow toward the Duke. Lady Selina March arrived 2 days later, Beautiful, aristocratic, appropriately somber but not excessively grieving. She was everything a second duchess should be: wealthy family, impeccable bloodlines, no inconvenient opinions. She was also, Clara noted from her kitchen exile, completely wrong for the Duke. Lady Selina spoke to him like he was a nervous horse to be gentled. She complimented the house without seeing it. She smiled at Poppy with the distant affection of someone who liked children in theory but found them exhausting in practice. Poppy hated her on sight. "She smells like flowers dyed in a bottle," Poppy announced at breakfast, loudly enough for the entire dining room to hear. Lady Augusta's smile went rigid. The Duke looked like he wanted the floor to open beneath him. Lady Selina laughed, but it was the careful laugh of someone performing graciousness. "Children are so charmingly honest." "I'm not being charming," Poppy said. "I'm being true." Clara, serving from the sideboard, barely managed not to smile. The house party became an exercise in careful warfare. Lady Augusta orchestrated events designed to showcase Lady Selina's suitability. Morning walks in the garden. Afternoon reading in the library. Evening music performances. The Duke participated with the enthusiasm of a man being fitted for a coffin. Clara was ordered to stay in the kitchen, invisible and silent. She cooked elaborate meals that guests praised without noticing. She made pastries that disappeared into aristocratic mouths while she remained carefully unseen. But Poppy refused to cooperate. The child appeared in drawing rooms at inappropriate moments. She accidentally spilled tea on Lady Selina's dress. She asked in front of everyone, "Are you going to take my daddy away too?" The Duke was mortified. Lady Augusta was furious. And Clara, watching from doorways, saw a small girl fighting the only way she knew how. After dinner one evening, Lady Augusta cornered Clara in the corridor outside the kitchen. "Miss Finch." The dowager's voice was ice wrapped in silk. "We need to speak plainly." Clara curtsied. "Your Grace. You've been encouraging my granddaughter's fantasies. Making yourself essential. Working your way into my son's good graces with soup and sympathy." Lady Augusta's eyes were calculating. "I won't insult your intelligence by pretending I don't know exactly what you're doing. I'm cooking, Your Grace. That's what I was hired to do. You're angling for a position that will never be yours. My son may be lonely, but he's not foolish enough to throw away his family's reputation on a kitchen woman." Clara felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear. Anger. "I'm not angling for anything," she said quietly. "And if you're concerned about your granddaughter's well-being, perhaps you should ask why she's fantasizing about new mothers in the first place." Lady Augusta's face went pale with fury. "You will leave Greymere Hall immediately after this house party concludes. If you refuse, I will ensure that letter from Lord Ashton's household reaches every respectable family in England. You'll never work again. Is that all, Your Grace?" Clara's voice remained steady. "Collect your wages from the steward. Be gone by Monday." Lady Augusta swept away, her perfume lingering like a threat. Clara stood alone in the corridor, her hands shaking. Not with fear. With rage at the injustice of powerful people deciding her life like she was a chess piece to be moved or removed at whim. She would leave. Not because Lady Augusta ordered it, but because staying would destroy the Duke's reputation and traumatize Poppy further. Sometimes survival meant retreat. She packed that night by candlelight, her few belongings fitting easily into her traveling bag. Tomorrow was Sunday. She would leave early Monday morning, before Poppy woke, before she could see the child's face break with another abandonment. But the next afternoon, everything changed. The house party guests went for a garden stroll, and Poppy disappeared. At first, nobody worried. The grounds were safe. The child often wandered. But 15 minutes became 30, then an hour, and panic began to build. "Poppy." The Duke's voice carried across the lawn, strained with fear. Servants scattered to search. Guests stood in awkward clusters, uncertain how to help. Lady Selina fluttered uselessly. Lady Augusta organized search parties with military precision. Clara knew immediately where the child had gone. The old summer house at the edge of the garden, nearly hidden by overgrown roses. Poppy had shown it to Clara weeks ago, whispered that it was her thinking place where nobody bothered her. Clara ran. She found Poppy curled on the dusty floor, knees pulled to chest, trying very hard not to cry. The child looked up when the door creaked. "I heard grandmother talking," Poppy whispered. "She's sending you away. She said you're not good enough. She said Papa would forget about you." Clara's heart broke cleanly. She knelt on the dusty floor and pulled the child close. "Sometimes grown-ups have to leave," Clara said gently. "Not because we want to, but because staying would hurt people we care about." "That's stupid." Poppy's voice was fierce. "You make Papa smile. You make the house feel warm. Why does that hurt anyone?" Clara didn't have a good answer. Because the truth that society valued bloodlines over kindness, reputation over truth, was too cruel for a 7-year-old. "Your father deserves to be happy," Clara said instead. "And so do you. If me leaving helps that happen." "It won't." Poppy pulled back, her face wet but determined. "I've been watching. He's happy when you're here. He eats meals. He laughs. He's my papa again instead of a ghost. If you leave, he'll disappear again." "Poppy, I picked you," the child said fiercely. "Not for me. For him. Because he needed someone who saw him as a person, not a duke. Someone who told him the truth. Someone who made him remember he was alive." Clara heard footsteps outside. The Duke burst through the door, his face wild with relief and fear. "Poppy. Thank God." He dropped to his knees, pulling his daughter into his arms. "Don't ever frighten me like that again." "I'm sorry, Papa." Poppy's voice was muffled against his shoulder. "But I can't let them send Miss Finch away. I can't watch you turn into a ghost again." The Duke's eyes met Clara's over his daughter's head, and something passed between them. Understanding. Grief. And something else, something Clara was afraid to name. "Come back to the house," the Duke said gently to Poppy. "We'll sort this out. Promise." Poppy demanded. "Promise you won't let grandmother win?" The Duke was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very clearly, "I promise." They walked back to the house together, Poppy between them holding both their hands. The guests watched from the terrace with varying expressions of curiosity, judgment, and calculation. Lady Augusta stood at the entrance, her face carved from marble. "Alaric. A word. Now." The Duke passed Poppy to Clara. "Take her inside. Make her something warm to drink." Clara led the child away, but they could hear raised voices from the Duke's study. Lady Augusta's fury. The Duke's quiet, implacable refusal. Reputation, scandal, unsuitable. "My household, my decision, she stays." The door opened. Lady Augusta emerged, her face white with rage. She swept past Clara without acknowledgement and went directly to Lady Selina. "We're leaving. Tomorrow morning. All of us." The guests scattered to pack. Clara stood in the hallway with Poppy, both of them waiting. The Duke appeared in the study doorway. His cravat was crooked. His hair was disheveled. He looked like a man who'd just fought a war in an afternoon. "Miss Finch. My study. Please." Clara's heart hammered. This was the dismissal. The gentle explanation that family came first, that society's judgment mattered, that she'd been a temporary comfort but nothing more. She followed him inside. He closed the door. "My mother," the Duke said without preamble, "has issued an ultimatum. You leave, or she will spread the accusation letter to every household in the county and make sure you never work again." Clara nodded. She'd expected this. "I told her," the Duke continued, and now his voice was quiet but absolutely certain, "to spread it. And to write my name beneath it. As the employer who believes you. As the man who will not allow injustice to stand simply because it's convenient." Clara stared at him, unable to breathe. "I'm not asking you to stay for Poppy," he said. "Though God knows she needs you. I'm asking you to stay for me. Because somewhere between the flour and the burned toast and the midnight kitchen conversations, I remembered how to be human. You did that. Not with manipulation or ambition, but with simple, honest presence. Your Grace." "Alaric," he corrected gently. "If we're going to weather the scandal together, you should probably use my name." "Alaric." The name felt strange on her tongue. Intimate. Dangerous. Your reputation. My reputation, he interrupted, has kept me miserable for 2 years. I'm done choosing appearance over truth. He moved closer, but didn't touch her. Just stood near enough that she could see the determination in his eyes. I'm not asking you to be my mistress or some hidden shame. I'm asking you, with full knowledge of the cost, if you would consider staying. Building something real. Giving Poppy the mother she's been picking so carefully. Giving me the chance to be the man I should have been all along. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I'm a cook. You're a duke. Society will destroy us. Then we'll build new society. His voice was steady. With people who value character over bloodlines. Truth over tradition. Love over reputation. Love. The word caught in Clara's throat. Yes, Alaric said simply. I love you. I know it's fast. I know it's impossible. I know every rule says this is madness. But I also know that for the first time in 2 years, I want tomorrow to come. That's because of you. Clara stood in the study with afternoon light slanting through windows, a duke standing before her offering everything society said was impossible. I need time, she whispered. Take all you need. But know that whether you stay or go, I won't let that letter destroy you. You have my protection regardless. That's not conditional on your answer. It was the right thing to say. The thing that made her trust him completely. Ask me again, Clara said. Tomorrow. After I've thought clearly. Alaric smiled, and it transformed his face. Tomorrow then. But as Clara turned to leave, she realized she already knew her answer. She'd known since a 7-year-old whispered I picked you and she hadn't run. If you're enjoying this story, I'd be so grateful for a like and subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories you'd love. 5. Clara woke before dawn on Monday morning. Her bag sat packed by the door, but she didn't pick it up. Instead, she went down to the kitchen and began making breakfast. The guests had left the previous evening in a flurry of scandal and speculation. Lady Augusta departed without speaking to her son, her fury a cold, living thing. Lady Selina went with sympathetic glances that didn't quite mask her relief at escaping a complicated situation. The house felt lighter without them. Empty, but lighter. Clara was pulling bread from the oven when Poppy appeared in the doorway, still in her nightgown, barefoot despite the morning chill. You're still here, the child breathed. I am, Clara confirmed. Poppy's face crumpled. Relief, joy, and residual fear all tangled together. She ran across the kitchen and threw herself at Clara with the full force of a 7-year-old who'd learned to grab happiness before it disappeared. Clara caught her, held her, felt small arms wrap around her neck with desperate strength. I thought you'd leave, Poppy whispered. Without saying goodbye. Like people do. Clara knelt so they were eye to eye. I told you. I won't leave without telling you why. I'm staying because I choose to. Not because your father ordered it. Not because you need me. Because I want to be here. Forever. The question was careful. Small. I can't promise forever. Nobody can. But I can promise today. And tomorrow. And as many days as you'll have me. It wasn't the fairy tale promise. It was better, it was real. Footsteps on the stairs signaled the Duke's approach. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, also disheveled from sleep, his presence transforming the space into something intimate and fragile. Miss Finch. His voice was careful. Hopeful. Good morning. Good morning, Your Grace. Clara rose, still holding Poppy's hand. The Duke glanced at her unpacked bag visible through the doorway to her room, and something in his face eased. I was wondering, he said slowly, if you might consider a different position in this household. Clara's heart hammered. Your Grace. Not cook. Though God knows we need you in the kitchen. But something more official. Someone to help manage Poppy's education. Her well-being. Someone with authority to make decisions about household matters. A governess. Clara asked carefully. A companion. A guardian. Someone Poppy can depend on without the relationship being defined entirely by employment. He was offering her protection. Position. A role that gave her status and security while acknowledging what they'd all carefully avoided naming. That's generous, Clara said. It's practical. The Duke moved into the kitchen properly now, his attention entirely on her. I need time. To mourn properly instead of hiding. To let Poppy adjust. To let society adjust. But I also need you to be safe. Protected. Part of this family in ways that can't be dismissed. And after. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. After time passes. Alaric's eyes held hers. After, if you're willing, I'll ask you properly. Not as an employer to staff. As a man to a woman. With all the time you need to be certain. Poppy tugged Clara's hand. Say yes. Please say yes. Clara looked at this child who'd picked her with such careful strategy. At this man who'd defended her when it cost him everything. At this kitchen that had become home without her noticing. Yes, she said simply. I'll stay. Poppy cheered. The Duke's face transformed with relief and something deeper, something that made Clara's breath catch. There's one condition, Clara added. Name it. Alaric moved closer. If I stay as myself. No pretending. No shrinking to fit expectations. And your mother doesn't rule my worth. Agreed. His voice was firm. Absolutely agreed. Then we have an understanding, Your Grace. Alaric, he corrected. We're family now. Use my name. That afternoon, the Duke called the household together in the entrance hall. Servants gathered with varying expressions of curiosity and concern. Mrs. Daintree stood beside Mr. Pembroke, who looked like he'd swallowed broken glass. Miss Finch, the Duke said clearly, is now companion and guardian to my daughter. She has authority over household matters affecting Poppy's welfare and education. This is not a temporary position. Anyone who cannot treat her with appropriate respect may seek employment elsewhere. Are we clear? Silence. Then Mrs. Daintree began to applaud. The other servants joined, some enthusiastically, others with careful neutrality. Mr. Pembroke, notably, did not clap. Pembroke. The Duke's voice cut through the applause. Do we have a problem? The steward's face was mottled red. No, Your Grace. Perfectly clear. But everyone knew he'd be writing letters to London by evening. The gossip would spread like fire. The Duke of Greymere had elevated a cook to companion. Scandal would follow. Let it come, Clara thought. She'd survived worse. That evening, Clara found Poppy in the nursery, arranging her dolls in careful rows. They need to meet you properly, the child explained. As family. Clara sat on the floor, and Poppy introduced each doll with elaborate backstory and personality. It was normal. It was sweet. It was the most peaceful Clara had felt in years. Thank you, Poppy said suddenly, interrupting her own doll narrative. For what? For not pretending to be my mama just because I said that thing. Poppy's voice was serious. For treating me like I was smart enough to understand true things. Clara's throat tightened. You are smart. Sometimes too smart. I know. Poppy grinned, and she looked like an ordinary 7-year-old for the first time since Clara had met her. That's why I picked you. I knew you'd be honest. Later, after Poppy was asleep, Clara sat in her new room, larger, better furnished, with a window overlooking the garden, and wrote a letter to Mrs. Daintree's sister in London. Not asking for work, but simply reconnecting with someone who'd once been kind. She'd spent so long running, hiding, protecting herself from risk. Now she was choosing to stay. To build something. To believe that sometimes courage was rewarded instead of punished. A knock at her door interrupted her writing. The Duke stood in the corridor, holding a small box. I wanted to give you this, he said. It was Eleanor's. My late wife. Her mother's ring. Clara's breath caught. Your Grace Alaric, I can't. Not as a proposal. Not yet. As a promise. That when the time is right, when we've both healed properly and Poppy's adjusted, I'll ask properly. And you'll have time to answer properly. But I want you to know my intentions are serious. Permanent. Real. Clara took the box with trembling hands. Inside was a simple gold band with a small sapphire, beautiful in its restraint. Keep it safe, Alaric said. For when we're ready. He left before she could respond. Clara sat alone with the ring, feeling its weight. Not just the metal, but the promise. The future it represented. Months passed. Lady Augusta wrote angry letters that the Duke answered with patient firmness. Some families cut ties. Others, surprisingly, reached out with quiet support. Lord Whitmore, who'd married a vicar's daughter 40 years ago, sent a note of encouragement. Lady Ashworth invited them to tea and told Clara she was refreshingly honest. Poppy flourished. She ate properly. She laughed daily. She started calling Clara by her first name instead of Miss Finch, which felt like a kind of adoption. The Duke changed. Slowly. He spent more time with Poppy. He laughed more. He stopped eating cold pie over sinks. He began to live instead of merely surviving. And Clara found herself part of a family she'd never imagined. Not through grand romance or dramatic rescue, but through the quiet daily work of showing up. Being present. Being honest. One morning, 6 months after the house party, Clara was teaching Poppy arithmetic in the morning room when the Duke appeared with a basket. "I've packed a picnic," he announced. "The three of us. The old summer house." Poppy cheered. Clara smiled. They walked together through the autumn garden, leaves crunching underfoot, the child running ahead, the adults walking close but not touching. At the summer house, now cleaned and made beautiful again, they spread a blanket and ate simple food. Bread, cheese, apples. Nothing elaborate. After they finished, Poppy excused herself to explore in that way children did when they sensed adults needed privacy. Alaric turned to Clara. "I have a question." "I'm listening." He pulled the ring box from his pocket. "It's been 6 months. Poppy's thriving. I've stopped haunting my own life. Society hasn't destroyed us. And I wake every morning grateful you're here." Clara's heart began to race. "Clara Finch," Alaric said quietly, holding the ring, "will you marry me? Not because Poppy picked you, though she has excellent taste. Not because it's convenient or socially acceptable, it's neither. But because somewhere between the soup and the flour and the midnight conversations, I fell in love with the woman you are. Your courage. Your honesty. Your refusal to shrink yourself to fit expectations." Clara looked at this man who defended her when it cost him everything. At the child hiding behind a tree, watching with barely contained hope. At the life they'd built through small choices and daily courage. "Yes," Clara said. "But on one condition." "Name it." "We marry in the village church. Simple ceremony. No grand society show. Just the people who actually matter." Alaric smiled. "Perfect." They married 6 weeks later in Graymere's small church. Mrs. Daintree wept. Mr. Pembroke, surprisingly, stayed and even looked almost approving. Poppy served as flower girl and declared herself the best picker ever. Lady Augusta did not attend. Some bridges remained burned. But the villagers came. Lord Whitmore and his wife travelled 3 days to attend. Lady Ashworth sent a wedding gift and a note, "Excellent work. Expect tea invitations." At the wedding breakfast, held in Graymere Hall's dining room, Poppy stood on a chair and announced, "I didn't pick Clara to be my mommy. I picked her because she makes our house feel like home." Clara answered, her hand in Alaric's, "Then let's build one that lasts." And they did. Not perfectly. Some society doors stayed closed. But village doors opened. Clara started teaching cooking to girls from working families. The Duke relaxed into being the father Poppy needed instead of the aristocrat society demanded. Poppy grew up knowing love looked like honesty, courage, and choosing each other daily. Years later, when Poppy was grown and asked her mother what the secret was to their happiness, Clara said simply, "Your father chose truth over tradition. I chose courage over safety. And you, my darling, picked us both with the wisdom of someone who knew what love actually looked like. Not grand romance. Not fairy tale rescue. Just daily choosing. Honest presence. And the revolutionary act of building family from courage instead of expectation." Clara Finch, who'd arrived at Graymere Hall expecting only wages and flour, became the Duchess who taught an entire household that sometimes the bravest love begins with a child's whisper and a bowl of soup made with care. And that, dear listeners, is more than enough magic for any story.